Well, good morning, everyone. It's 1 minute to 8 o'clock. If you're in the back and you'd like to come forward, that would be nice. But you don't have to, just an invitation. And then the great challenge is I'm going to ask everyone to turn their device on silent, or to put it in their pockets, or if you don't have a pocket, to put it under your seat or somewhere. We'll see if for the next half hour or so we could actually do without it. And it will probably buzz, so, you know. And it isn't because this is necessary to be mindful to not have one of these. It's that for a little while we're going to actually explore how to cultivate this something called mindfulness, and then maybe we'll be able to bring it into those moments when we've got to be in relationship to this machine. Okay, and if at any time you can't hear me, just let me know, raise your hand, say something, and I will talk louder. So originally, when I was asked to lead this session this morning, they asked me if I would. So what happened was I sent my slides, because I gave a talk on Sunday? Yeah. And the days are gone in the jet lag. And then they kept sending me more messages saying, send your PowerPoint, and I kept sending the message back, I have. Does this mean you didn't get it? And they said, no, it's for this session. And I said, oh, you want me to do a PowerPoint for this session as well? And I said, well, I really wouldn't want to do that because it's just slides and it will just distract you from you. And they said, oh, that sounds interesting. No slides. And an experience. So we'll practice together. And then we'll have some time to talk. And what I said is I'd weave some of the questions that they send to me into my comments as we explore this morning. So there might be some moments that we would have dialogue. We'll see. But, and this is only one method, one way of cultivating this something called mindfulness, which really in some very real way, in a simple way, is awareness itself. And since we actually are already aware, it isn't as if there's something we need to get, but rather it's something we might need to become, or we can become more familiar with, so it's more available to us throughout the course of our lives. And because in some very real way, our capacity to be aware is connected to our capacity to really be awake. And often you've probably noticed that while we're not sleeping in the physical sense of the word or physiologically, have you ever noticed that you're not quite awake? Yeah, it happens to us all the time. That noticing itself is mindfulness, and an extraordinarily useful, although sometimes bewildering experience. Oh, I'm not quite here. I'm not quite in relationship with you right now, or with myself, or with the larger environment. So it's about that kind of wakefulness. So one thing that sometimes helps me around this willingness to cultivate this familiarity with awareness is to remember some things. And this is one of the things that I try and remember every day, and it may sound morbid to you. Yesterday at 8:06 in the morning, there were 157,000 people on the planet that are not here this morning. Gone. We don't know where they've gone, but they're not here. They all died in that 24-hour period. But you and I are here, and we're alive. So why not take advantage of it? Why not know it in some deep and full way that isn't simply driven by biological conditioning or mental constructs? And so that's why the invitation to put these away for a little while. To actually maybe get a feeling for what does it mean to be alive in the most basic sense of the word. And so we're going to start right at home. We all are in a body. So I'm going to invite you to sit up in your chair and find a way that you could put your feet flat on the floor. If you need to use the back of the chair to support your back, it's okay. I'm going to come up a little off the back of the chair because I don't want to be slid back so far. Those little chairs you're using are preferred, but they wanted me to use this one for the visuals. And then find a comfortable place for your hands. They could be on your knees or you can fold them on your thighs. And you can either close your eyes or you can leave your eyes open. If you leave your eyes open, I'd simply suggest that you let your gaze fall at in front of you a few feet or at the back of the chair in front of you, just to somehow reduce the visual information, at least for a little while. And then soon enough we'll see that we can be attentive and aware with our eyes wide open, looking at one another. So the first step in this process this morning is, can you simply become aware of sitting in your chair? So what do I mean by that? Well, of course the thinking mind knows that you're sitting, and it will say, well, of course I'm sitting. So what do I mean? How does it feel? Or how about if we actually become aware of sitting through the direct experience of information from the body? And the way the body speaks with us is through the language of sensation. So, for instance, is it possible to feel your hands against your legs, if that's where they are, or if they're folded? What does that feel like? So not what does that think like, what does that feel like? Or what does it feel like to feel the back side of your buttocks meeting the seat of the chair? That's usually a sensation of pressure. If you're using the back of the chair, can you feel the way your back and the back of the chair meet as sensation? Maybe you notice the feeling of air on the face or on the hands. Now, of course, there's other input from the mind. in the form of thoughts or emotions, but for now we're simply exploring this realm of sensation that arises from our awareness of, well, it's already arising and we're becoming aware of it. Oh, it's already here. It isn't as if you have to manufacture the sense of pressure or heat or coolness or pressure or ease or tightness. Now you might carry that same sense of awareness to what's it like in the legs right now. Can you simply feel your legs? And how about your arms? So you don't have to make anything happen. You don't have to improve the situation in any way or yourself. The invitation is to simply be aware of what's already here. And then, of course, you have a torso, so can you be aware of the torso? Sitting upright in space. The back, the front, belly, the chest. And the face, and the head. So for a moment, simply being aware of sitting here as a pool of sensation. This is what we mean when we say sitting. And then you might notice that in the midst of this sitting, in the midst of this awareness of the body, that you could actually begin to feel your breathing. So this phenomenon, which we come into the world with and we leave with, right? We have a first breath, and at some point we're going to have a last breath. And in between the first and the last breath, we have the experience of this something called life. So people often feel like they have to alter their breathing in some way, and the invitation here is to not alter it at all, but in the same way that we've become aware of the body sitting here, we become aware of the body breathing. And we'll use the same doorway of sensation. So, for instance, you might notice that when the breath comes into the body, there's a kind of movement in the belly or in the chest. And as the body exits, there's also some movement in the chest or the belly. Maybe you notice some sensations around the tip of the nostrils. So if you've come in late, just a reminder to turn off your cell phone or at least put it on silent. Thank you. So you might notice that there's a place in the body where you're most capable of feeling the breath coming and going. It might be in the abdomen. It might be in the chest. You might have a more whole body sensation of the breath coming and going. So wherever it's most vivid for you, meaning wherever you can identify the sensations, feel them, that's the place to dwell or occupy for a little bit. So by example, I'm aware of the belly expanding slightly on the in-breath, and I'm aware of it collapsing back towards the spine a little bit on the out-breath. So that's what I'm focusing on for now. And people often ask, well, am I supposed to do something with this breathing? And the answer is no. It's happening 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for decades, without us doing anything. But for this little period of time, we're actually becoming aware of it. Well, how come? Well, because it's here, for one, it's happening. Two, you're probably noticing that the breath itself is happening right now. Like, you can't be aware of the last breath because it's gone, it'll never come back. And you can't be aware of the next breath because it hasn't arrived yet. And hopefully it will. So you can only be aware of the breath that's happening now. And now. So that allows us to actually stabilize ourselves in the present moment. Well, what's so useful about that? Well, everything that's happening to us is always happening in the present moment. All the decisions we have to make are happening now. All the moments of contact or disconnection are happening now. And so this simple capacity to be aware of the breathing allows us to bring more of our resources to bear in this very moment. And that can be very stabilizing. Even if the mind is busy, just this capacity to gather ourselves deliberately, purposefully, can be useful. And it's always available. You could be aware of the breath while you're walking to the restrooms, or sitting down to eat breakfast, or answering a phone call. So for a little while, I'll stop speaking and let's see what it's like to simply rest in this awareness of breathing. And of course, you will have thoughts coming into the mind. There's no need to try and stop them or make the mind blank. And for now, just let them come and go, and notice that you can still touch base you can actually feel the breath coming and going. And part of the beauty of this is that there's nothing we have to do. Rather, we can allow ourselves to simply be. And the big difference is that we can know it. And you'll probably find that thoughts will carry you away sometimes, and emotions will carry you away, or that's what happens. These things grab our attention, just the way our cell phones do, and carry us away. This is normal. And so each time that you notice you've been carried away and the mind is no longer aware of the feeling of breathing, you can gently escort yourself back. Gently escort the mind back to the sensations in the body. This might happen 50 times in the next 2 minutes, and that's okay. So 50 times noticing the mind wander away, 50 times coming back to the sensation of breathing. It's a training process. It's not a test. There's that wonderful study, the data about the wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So we get to experiment and see how that goes. So mind wanders, you notice it gently, meaning no need to scold yourself about this. This is what happens. And then there's this dimension of firmness in the sense of your resolve to return to this feeling of the breath in the body over and over again, which is really returning to this moment. And you might be noticing just how much the mind shuttles between the past and the future. And yet to meet the stresses and strains and the demands and the challenges in our lives requires us to be present, awake, here, not somewhere else. And then as you feel ready and in your own time, If you'd like to take a more voluntary breath in and out, feel free to do so. And if your eyes have been closed, allowing the eyes to open. And with that same quality of awareness, how about turning to the person to your left or your right and greeting them? Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. How fantastic, isn't it, that we come from all over the world. And I think I read somewhere, and if there's any physicists in the room, you can tell me, I don't know if it's true or not, that in the course of 72 to 96 hours, every living, breathing organism on the earth exchanges oxygen molecules. That's amazing if it's so. Trees, plants, algae, whales, porpoises. Well, maybe, yeah, humans, cats, dogs, camels, back and forth. So right now your eyes are open, and we don't seem to be practicing in some formal way, but are you aware? Can you be aware of the feeling of sitting here right now? Some moment, some sensation in the body that says, yes, I'm sitting, and you know it? Could you even touch breath, for instance, with even a half of an in-breath or a half of an out-breath right now, and know it? So, you know, in some very real way, there's nothing new about any of this. Our forebears, whether they were in the desert or where they lived in forests or in mountains or close to the ocean, they've been doing this for hundreds of thousands, well, 10,000 years or more. We keep pushing back the date when we showed up. So we really don't quite know when, but quite some time ago. Continuous habitation by human beings. And one of the characteristics that we know of in this age, which is in some ways being called the information or the digital age, is that while we have some real sense of virtually instantaneous connectivity, I mean, I love that I can be in Boston and I can hear from Alia in Dubai and instantaneously, and we can have a conversation. And yet we're getting a lot of data that suggests that the being out there is so seductive that we're losing some capacity to really touch base with what's here. And you and I know to do our jobs well, to take care of our children, to meet with our colleagues, to develop teams at work and get the job done, all require us to be present, to solve the problems that we have. Of course, we have to think about their implications in the past and the future. But when are we solving those problems, really? It's always now. That algorithm we're developing is happening now. That moment when we hear about the death of a loved one or the sickness of someone we care about, we're receiving that now. So how do we meet that now so we can meet them now, either in our own awareness or in the actual physical presence. So you might notice that throughout the course of the day, that there are moments when you could simply stop for a moment. And that might be physically. I mean, just for a moment, a second, and be deliberate about becoming aware of inhabiting your own body, of being aware of your own breathing, of noticing that before you respond, you could stop and ask yourself, what is it I want to say? Because in some very real way, what we're really talking about is this capacity to be deliberate about stopping and not being pulled around so much by all that's around us. And you know, we know that in other human beings. Who here in this room hasn't had the sense at some moment in time of saying about somebody, they're really present? They're really here. And they're here for me. That's what it feels like. And I'm here for them. And it doesn't have to be some big deal. It's as simple as being human to human. So it's not something ritualized in the sense of, you know, the mind doesn't have to now start to scold you about not being mindful, but instead, these little moments of, oh, I could wake up right now. That moment of feeling as if you're scattered is actually a moment of waking up. Because then we have the opportunity to say, okay, let me gather myself again. Let me recollect again. And as far as I can tell, spiritual and religious traditions around the world have built this into the very fabric of their existence, this capacity for us to remember. Because have you noticed how much of the time we forget? And so in some ways we're beginning to learn that we could actually close the gap between forgetting and remembering. Sometimes the gap is for days, I've noticed, hours. And then in other moments, it's like, oh, back, here. And since we came from all over the place to be here, the real question is why not be here for it? Once at a workshop, somebody said they had written themselves a postcard that said, having a great time, wish I were here. Because they weren't here. I read about a service in New York where you could give them your itinerary if you were going to travel and where you were going, and they would produce for you postcards with messages, and then you could just put them in the box so they got the stamp on them from that country or that city. But you didn't write them in real time. You weren't here for them. It's that same idea. Well, let's be here, because our work demands us to be here. Our capacity to survive whatever we're heading into requires us to be present and incredibly awake. Did you see the sun rising this morning? Amazing. The fog over the harbor. We're going to walk out of this building and see hundreds of people outside at the moment. Take it in. See what it's like. So let's one more moment notice in these last moments. I'm sitting. What does it feel like right now to sit? Right back into those sensations. With their eyes open or closed, doesn't matter. Could I feel my breathing right now? even a half a breath. Can I notice what's moving through the mind in terms of thoughts and emotions without having to do anything about it right now? Notice those pulls, those pushes. And how about this? Could I for a moment place my attention on my chest? There's something we call the heart that we can't see. I'm not talking about the pump, although the pump itself is gorgeous. 3 billion beats on average across a lifetime. Just keeps going. But I'm talking about the heart that in every language we know what we're talking about when we say the heart. Can you allow yourself for a few moments to simply touch base with that in you? That is the heart. That in you that sympathizes, feels tenderness, warmth, mercy, compassion. Feels blessed with the mercy and compassion of another, the tenderness of another, is capable of both receiving and giving. You can simply rest in the awareness of the breath in the chest. And maybe carry it with you from moment to moment, or touch base with it little moments during the course of the day. Maybe that would be one of the best gifts we could offer one another as we continue to gather on this second day. And I wish you a good morning.